you very much. Thank you very much for having me here. It's actually the first time I presented for about 12 years. So I presented something here on Tertullian back when I was doing my PhD, and I haven't been back to present anything since. So it's a pleasure to be back here again. I hope to show you a little bit of the project, what we've been doing on Galatians. So as you know, it's part of the GALaCSy Project, and it wouldn't have been possible without the funding, and also it's been greatly benefited by the dialogue that we've had with Munster, with Tertullian. Especially, I have to say thank you for Ulrich, who spoke a lot about the different ideas. Tertullian shared a lot of my ideas of that. And at the same time, we had monthly meetings with Ila and with Anna and Christina, and it was absolutely vital to shaping a lot of the idea of the edition. So, the edition of Galatians was one of only about 3 or 4 that has not been published in the Vetus Latina series. So it benefited greatly from the foundational work that had already been done by Vedas on the special Ephesians and the other epistles. And then also on Frolic, who wrote the introduction to 1 Corinthians, put in a lot of Vedas practice and ideas into great explanation for the text of 1 Corinthians. We didn't have that for Galatians. So basically what we did was copied it. As a starting point in any case, and then adapted it to how the situation was in reality in Galatians. So I will talk you through some of these methodological problems or issues that we had, as well as the decisions we made. And also one decision I made, which perhaps unwise, was to take my understanding of Frolich's description of the different text types and put them into a kind of schema. I say kind of schema because text types cover a wide variety of things. They're used to connect fragmentary information, and sometimes they can be from completely different sources. It's not realistic to talk about dissensions, but in Galatians we have a lot of information. Picking up on what Frank said earlier, it's the same thing. In Galatians we have a lot of data, and you can, I think, see the progress and development of the Latin text very easily. So it's not, I would say, completely wrong to talk about dissensions and text types here being very similar. So this is my understanding of Frolic. And you say these are the main text types which we have throughout Galatians, being I, the Italian being I, and B being a European division. I'll come back more on this. And at the end, I'll show you how we have adapted it really to my understanding of Galatians. So these are principal witnesses for the text type. You want to go from there. So text type X is basically Tertullian. We have a little bit of Irenaeus as well, but it's basically Tertullian. And Tertullian in his Ad Marcionem, book 5 in particular, he has continuous commentary citations of Galatians. So we have a lot of Tertullian, 400 citations, 200 citations. K is mainly based in Scythian, especially with Testimonia. Text type C is something that you don't see often in the other times. Greater never really mentioned it in any detail. What we have in Galatians is extensive citations from Pachomius, Liber Regularum, from books 2 to 4 inclusive. So we have a lot of data, and it's a very interesting conservative text because he's a Donatist. So he had a conservative text, and it functions very well as a sort of bridge between the Italian text that I and the earlier Catholic text. Then we have text type D, chiefly represented by the Carmen and the Venezuelans, the bilinguals, plus the book that commentary that Fred discovered. And one additional witness that we have in Galatians, and Anna will definitely talk about more in the next session, is the Bobbio Bible, which we found it's midway through the project, be a very good witness to be, and become a very good. I'll come back on that after. I and it with J, mainly based on Ambrosiastic method. We have both ascensions in Galatians, but that's one based on the Z manuscript, which can be Valenciana, and the other one is we have many more witnesses to it, with Gamma. And finally, Augustine. In Galatians, we have about 2/3 of Galatians citations covered by the Christian fragment, and the text is essentially identical to that of Augustine in the Galatians. Right, I'll get stuck in straight away with the first problem with Galatians and then with the Old Latin, is what to do with Tertullian. Is he, as Michael Dormandy said yesterday, purely an ad hoc translated to Greek, or is he quoting an actual Latin text? I'm going to put up a spoiler, I cannot tell you. I would like to be able to, but until we have all of the data for all of the Pauline epistles, I don't think we're able to say. But the difference to what Michael was saying yesterday, and that Tertullian had a very different text, to say the later text when he was looking at the Agape with the Lectio and Caritas. That's not the case in Galatians. His text is pretty close to, well, in fact, lexically, his text is very close to what we have, which is interesting. Of course, his use of the Agape here doesn't really tell us anything, but that was probably the word that's being used for begins to mind at that time in the 3rd century in Africa, but this is typical. Unfortunately, this is also typical. So we have two sides of Tertullian where you think maybe he's quoting a Latin text, and then when you have something like that, quite clearly translating that book straight to Greek. Well, what we can say, though, for sure, is that many times this Vorlage is the same as what we have in the other Latin written. So here is again typical Tertullian. The word order is different. We have spirit Paulum instead of spiritus. We could put that down to as rhetorical style. It's often the case he changes the word order to suit his text. What we do have is Benedictine, which is reading from P46, where eulogium has apparently replaced evangelium. Perhaps this is an error just from by eulogia already at the start of the sentence. And if it were an error, then this would be a case of Tertullian quoting a Latin error, as it were, a widely found Latin. But as I said, it's already been found in P46, so all we can say is probably the same follow. But here we have something a little bit more interesting. Again, we have this Latin text of omnis and fili estis fide, which in Tertullian we have absolutely no reference to say or here. And if we only had Tertullian, I would say, well, he's just been elliptical with his citation. That shows us nothing. However, we do have exactly the same text in Hilary Psalm 91. What's interesting about Hilary is he usually cites in the Psalm the J text type, which is the later form of I. And as you can see, the citations are completely different. There's no way that Hilary could have just been copying Tertullian. Tertullian only quotes this, whilst Hilary quotes the entire of 3:23-24, and then starts with 26 like that. So what's going on here? Perhaps this was the original Latin text, and I would like to hypothesize that. The problem is we don't have anything with the omission of A or with the omission of hair, really, except for Hilary and Tertullian. We have changed in word order today in Marius Victorinus, and also VA 135, the Bobbio Bible, which could suggest that something's going on. But it would take a great editor to say, restore the text of I, for example, on the basis of Hilary, then that it was an ancient text. Unfortunately, what we don't have here, and that's the problem throughout Galatians, is the alpha recension of Ambrosius. So the alpha recension has a truncated lemma text. So sometimes you get him and it's brilliant. Other times you're relying on the gamma recension. So that is pretty much all I have to say about Tertullian. Obviously, once we have all of the data of the Pauline epistles, we can maybe do an internal check to see if his Latin in Galatians differs from his Latin being quoted in the other Pauline epistles. And that would suggest perhaps that he is following the pre-existing Latin form. Until we have more data, though, we can't really say anything. So that's why I'm saying Tertullian in the X line, which Fredo originally designated for ad hoc translations of the Greek, or an unstable text type, as it were. I think, although I like the idea that he was in contact with a Latin text at the time, and a lot of, I think, the lexics of Galatians, which I'll show after, the vocabulary will point towards that. We cannot say for sure at the moment. Cyprian were on a much firmer ground. I've put on here some examples where Cyprian has omissions, which are also found in the rest of the Latin tradition. The same problem with Tertullian. We don't really have a smoking gun where he's citing a verse where there's a big Latin error in it. But anyway, why would he? If he had a Greek text next door to him, why would he cite Latin? Cyprian, we do have for example, this doublet here that's only found in the Latin tradition, Castica, which is found throughout the Latin tradition. So 75 Clementanus, Bernalianus, Budapest, also the D, Regan, Cyprian, Irenaeus, Sicilian, Ambrosius, the gamma recension. So that's your I text. And there we go. These are all the super Augustine stuff. The fact that it appears in the bilinguals might be evidence that we have here the Greek Western variant. Might also be back translations from the Latin. Apart from Cyprian, one other source of this K text type, which is the latest development in Africa, is actually Hilary. Hilary, not the Psalms, but his De Trinitate, which where they do cross over the text is very similar with Cyprian, and also we have quite a lot of it, and it's much older text than he was using in his Psalm commentary. Okay, I mentioned about Tychonius. The importance of him is an early conservative text with some interesting readings, like the Epistle, which you also find in Tertullian, by the way. It often looks as though it's a transitional text between the early X or K and the later B and I. These are, do you all have the handout? Oh yeah, don't worry. I put on the handout just more general readings. It's not important really. If you want to take some of the readings back with you really and have a chill. Do that. So mention the I text. Mention the A text type. It is very definitely consistent between Augustine's Galatians commentary, which you're lucky to have the whole commentary, more or less, in Galatians, and the Phrygian fragment. What's interesting about it is a general desire to create a text that is closer to the Greek. So, for example, here you have lost about the end of revision, or Epochai, was it's bringing about is the old Latin. That's right. Epolemi is only found in 77, so it's most likely the back translation from the Latin. But this is typical of Augustine, or Augustine's text, the one who's using the Galatians. Another example here is we have non-ready rendering with Igon, whereas the Old Latin has ready name. And again, we have Reden, which is back translation probably. Although, what am I saying? I need to read my own operation. I would say, no, this is not a back translation. This is very much a reading that's there present in the original Greek. Okay. Dating Augustine's commentary in the A text type is more problematic, however. And so I'm sure you're aware of the theory, first of all, presented by De Bruyne, Dennis and De Bruyne, that Augustine was a revisor of the Bible. That has now been pretty abandoned. And then there were the theory we see in, say, Bakari and Garo relating to the Psalms, that Augustine brought a Psalter written over to Africa from Milan, from North Italy. Reason recently, in 2010, showed that that was unlikely, because in fact, this same text type in the Psalm, and which is pretty much the same as the one being used in the Phrygian fragment. So very similar in the technique of trying to render the Greek much more accurately, also with some, let me say, sometimes some exegetical revisions in it as well. Very similar in the text type. So if you ever have a chance to have a look at BL 300, the Corona Psalter, and compare it with the Phrygian fragments, BL 64, very close. So Tychonius, commentary on the Apocalypse, already using the text found in BL 300 in the Psalms. So it's impossible, really, that it was Augustine who brought the text over. More likely, it was already known. It would be nice to be able to show the same thing in Galatians. Unfortunately, we only have 2 Galatian citations of Tychonius' commentary on the Apocalypse. So, yes, they do align, again, with text type A, Augustine's text type A, rather than, for example, the earlier AD text type, which is the case with Tychonius' Liber Regularum. But at the same time, only 2 citations. So we have to see, I would like to also see if that's also the case in 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians. When we get that data coming in, if we have more Tychonius' Apocalypse citation, we might be able to say that 380 is a terminus antiquam, really, for this A text type in coming to use. Move on to D now. The big difference in the D text type, which is the European text type that Schrader says is revised from the original translation against a Western Greek example sometime in the early 4th century. Now, big difference in the Galatians edition, and also we'll see much more about this from Anna afterwards, is the addition of 1 through 5. This is the kind of reading which I would have been a little bit skeptical about in BL 75, since the other do not have it, is with Christie. But in BL 135, we do have an erasure of two letters more or less, just before Christie, by a later hand that's trying to bring the text into line with Vulgate, and that's common for BL 135. So I reconstructed the text. The issue here is conjecture, and I do think it is probably a originally focused. That's one example which is based on conjecture. Here we have other examples where BL 135 provides us with the text where BL 75 is corrupted. So here it's only BL 135 and BL 75 Grammaticus and Logic that deserve that word order, which is interesting. And then at 3.3, no manuscript apart from BL 135 all have some form of consumer mini or consumer mini. This is because there is a note in the previous page, and I can't show you it for those who looked here. That's why it's started. The BL75 also has the Fici R mini, which is a subjunctive, and there's absolutely no need for the Fici R mini here. It's a regular occurrence in BL75 is that you do get these vowels being, how do you say, misspelled as well. And it's only BL 135 that gives us the 50 minute present. Let's say probably the rendering of our P readings. So without BL 135, we would have to conjecture that. So it's very useful manuscript. Right, now talking about the I text type a little bit. So Rolig speaks of the I text type taken up with greater relief as a twin development of the D text type, one that was used in Italy and that developed in the 4th century, in the early 4th century. Alongside the work, I can show you up here, we have our idea of B and I developing at more or less the same time. There's our Tychonius, there's our Tertullian, there's our Augustus. And down here is our Rolig, which we'll get on to. Very interesting thing about I text type is it's consultative. Peter Lawrence, Hugh Horton, and the books before them, who mentioned the Brian, have all talked about Ambrosius' preference for using his so-called bad Latin manuscripts than ones that he felt had been revised against the Greek. They had brought in errors in the Greek. There's a very interesting passage from Romans in his commentary where he says that might as well use these archaic Latin manuscripts, because how do we know that those which have been corrected against the Greek are, in any case, good correction? So this is an example of where I is very useful. In X, in this case, it's Irenaeus, we have the rendering of Praxair and Expectorum. D, as you can see, has a rendering from Cain, which you also see in the later examples. Jerome H. J. Proctor Transgressiones, Proctor Transgressionem, and then Proctor Transgressiones is the body effect. Now, looking at I, not only in the after century, we don't have any rendering of Cain, which we don't have in 75 as well. So it looks very much as though this is the original Latin reading. Also, we have a rendering of Factorum, Praxeon, as opposed to Parabasion. In Parabasion, we might ask ourselves here, if it's not come into the Greek tradition, as it has come into the Latin tradition from Romans. It's in the equivalent passage in Romans. And we might have here the Praxeon, which is reading 246, the original Greek. Okay, but I'll be quick. Okay. Two text sets I haven't really talked about are J and B. Now, J is an early revision of I, and I can show this here. So here we have a very unusual word to think about, being used as to render apocalypse tonight. As you can see, nearly every other later text type changed to render it by some kind of revelare. D here and I are the only ones, and it's only the alpha recension of Ambrosiaster and VL75 that have rendering it by Retegabata. Retegere for apocalypso is only found elsewhere. Here. So that's Valentinus in Luke 12:2, and also in Matthew 10:26 in the Book of the Answer. So we're talking extremely early language. Everywhere else, within the Pauline epistles, but also in Catholic epistles everywhere, and throughout the Psalms translated by Latin. So if we go back to this, the problem this caused, this very early vocabulary that we have in I. And I can give you another example with Lenitus, for Qualitas. Michael was speaking about it yesterday. Lenitas is not found anywhere in, except for Tertullian and Cyprian, but it's found as the rendering for Qualitas in Galatians. The problem is that very early on, the I text types vocabulary somehow didn't pass the byte check. So we have to have, as it were, these different renderings of it. And one of them was the J text type. So here. And I would say we find it first being used in terms of Irenaeus, and then clearly it was a continuous revision right down to the time of about Rufinus to Rome, where it eventually came into the Vulgate. So this is basically understanding compared to Codex. So we do have these twin traditions in the 4th century. We do have an early revision to the I text, which was about early 4th century, and because too much of the vocabulary was completely defunct by that stage. And then transgressing into later secondary revision, which became the basis of the volume. Okay, we're now at about 5:19. I hope to have the whole edition finished, certainly within a couple of months, and then I hope we'll be able to see how much it affects our understanding of Galatians and the Pauline epistles in general. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, and great to see also this result and the coaching result from the GALaCSy project. One quick question I would allow with one quick answer. It's like they're all longer questions, so those we have to break. So Oliver, thank you.